Good morning, good morning, good morning, everyone. It is 10:01, and so we are going to get this party started. Thank you for attending our inaugural installment of the 2021-2022 Equity and Inclusion Speaker Series. Our theme this year is moving forward with equity mindedness. And all of our topics will center on advancing this and the movement of it. Should you attend all of our sessions, you will be recognized at the end of the year and receive some pretty cool perks. Today, I will serve as the moderator. So at the conclusion of the presentation by Mr. Ball, you may drop messages to me in the chat and I will read them to everyone. A special thanks to the MCC Tech team and to all of you for being here today, because you could be somewhere else, but we're glad you're here with us. I promise you, today's speaker will not disappoint. He is our friend. He is our friend and our colleague in the very, very important and necessary work that we do in TRIO. To formally introduce him is Mr. Mark Patton, Sr., our Director of Student Support Services. Mark, take it away.
Good morning, everybody. My pleasure to introduce Trent. Trent Ball is an Associate Vice President for Equity and Access at Southeast Missouri State University, SEMO, and provides leadership and management of the academic support centers. Mr. Ball also provides additional leadership to the Division of Equity, Access, and Behavioral Health. He assists in the development of the university's Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Plan, provides diversity training and outreach for the academic and administrative units across the university to develop and implement initiatives that focus on the recruitment and retention of minority faculty and staff, as well as underrepresented populations. Trent Ball is the past board of chair for the Council of Opportunity in Education, COE, past president of the Educational Opportunity Association, EOA, and past president of MoCanE, all TRIO and educational opportunities and access promoting professional organizations. Currently, Ball serves on the Ferguson Youth Initiative Board, FYI, the Missouri Court Appointed Special Advocates, MOCASA Board of Directors, Lumina's Federal Policy Corps, Jean Slade's Girls and Boys Club Board of Directors, co-chair of the St. Louis Graduate Steering Committee, and as the TRIO and College Access Programs representatives to the CAS Standards Board of Directors. Recently, he joined a team of professionals and administrators exploring the opportunity to reboot the Missouri Associations of Blacks in Higher Education, MABHE. Ball has a Bachelor's of Science in Criminal Justice and Psychology from Culver Stockton College, a Master of Arts in Psychological Counseling and Therapy, and is completing a master's in public administration at Southeast Missouri State University. Ladies and gentlemen and esteemed colleagues, I present for you Mr. Trent Ball.
I have got to cut that down. I was getting bored listening to it. But actually, part of what we're going to talk about, and it's kind of neat because as I shared earlier, I'm going to send you guys all the articles. I'm going to quote the books I use here so you guys can have the resources. But I'm also going to send you guys a link to something that we've done recently. I think Mark participated in our video series, but through St. Louis graduates, we worked with Lumina to develop these two reports called Degrees to Less Stat. Embedded within those reports is a conversation about the importance of equity and the 5 pillars of success for underrepresented students. We've actually had this morning before this meeting, we were going back and forth because we're going to remove the term underrepresented and go with the term systematically excluded. Because so often we have to realize that we modify and we give the advantage to the students, not to the system. So today's conversation about equity is going to begin with an overview of equity mindedness and the system itself and go into the advising piece. I'm not here to tell you guys how to advise and confident you guys are knocking that out. I'm here to talk about how we think about the clients and students that we serve when we do the advising work. I've always said that advising is so important, I don't even let my staff do it. We serve as ancillary advisors, but I believe that supporting the advising system and structure is very important. You'll also find out, and Mark and Dr. Gooch will tell you that I'm also a big superhero fan. Everybody recognizes those red boots behind me, I'm sure. You're going to see a few of those things going through this process, but they will be relative to our conversation. We have 4 key points. Why is an intentional focus on equity important? What are the critical components of the equity discussion? Let's discuss equity in college advising and our roles and responsibilities as equity champions. First, me. I think the work that we do is magical. And when it hits right, you change students' trajectory of their lives and their families' lives. I think advising is the first, you hear me say it later, it's the first campus-connected relationship that most students actually do make. So it's very important that we make that and we continue that trajectory with the student. Right now, there are 5 mega trends threatening higher education, but these are also opportunities. New pressure on students to find meaning and purpose. New technologies will redefine how we interact. The pandemic taught us that. Changing the student demographics, the rapidly evolving world of work, and the increased demand for institutional accountability. Once again, in my quotations from NASPA, Dr. Smith and Dr. Blix. I highlighted changing student demographics because that's why equity is so important. This was the first year, 2021, that the graduating high school class was 49.1% majority. Now, there's a book I'm going to show you guys later that I use about demographics that talked about the fact that the children born in 2010 entered kindergarten in 2015 was the first majority brown and black class. That means our freshman class of 2028 is going to be majority minority. Those demographics are changing quickly. We have to prepare for that, and equity in our systems is going to help define the success of those students. And again, I'll have the books for you guys to follow that up. Number 1, the inequities that we encounter impact academic excellence. When we discuss access, academic excellence, and completion, we often ignore some important issues coming in the door. Preparation, support, and guidance. We talk about takeaways, I call these bring withs. These are things students are bringing with them when they come in the door. But education itself is an economic empowerment issue. Equity underlines that. We must strive to provide equity throughout the system, so we're targeting our resources to the students that need them most. You'll hear an expression called the tyranny of all. So often we think that one size fits all consistently. Our students don't come in like that. We've learned something, we've had reinforced learning these last 18 months on how chaotic our live students can actually be and what we have to do to meet them where they are. The system isn't broken, it was built this way. So our original concept of working with students begins with who's in that system, how they get in that system, how does the system support them? So we gotta stop saying that, it's the issue. Like I said a moment ago, we're going from talking about underrepresented to systematically excluded. There's a great book called Becoming a Student-Ready College. I have those for you. Once again, you see the reference at the end. This conversation is about, we always talk about, are the students ready for college? The question here is, are colleges ready for the students that are coming? We talk a lot about students not being college ready. Why don't we ask what it means to be a student-ready college? So the book is 6 authors, Thomas Major being one of them, different areas, financial aid, advising, diversity, equity, and what needs to go on to be considered a student-ready college. This is what we hear a lot. Students today are not prepared for post-secondary education. Why are we admitting students who are not ready for college? Are we lowering our academic standards? Students are not motivated. It's not my responsibility to convince them that they're getting an education is important for their lifelong success. We hear these things. Simultaneously, we know what's actually going on. The pandemic made us have a conversation across education about standardized testing, what that looks like. I watched a lot of students, because I work with a lot of college access organizations, attend colleges this year because there is no ACT requirement. So my question to those colleges is, what are you doing to prepare yourself to support those students? St. Louis University, I went to school there for 2 years, so I think I can talk about them a little bit. They jumped in and created something called first-year navigators. They hired 6 of them. They assigned them to some of the students that were coming in, and I'm watching what's going to come out of that. They're part of our post-secondary equity network through St. Louis graduates. So we work with them all the time. We have those conversations. First thing I said was, where are you going to house these people at? Please don't be this life coach structure. Please be a true navigator for the student, because these things are real. Our students lead chaotic lives. We know that. Dr. Brown McNair always talks about the characteristics of a student-ready college and universities are not focused on student deficits, but on what educators can do and must do to change the institution for students. We have to stop modifying and describing the deficits of the students and talk about the system that we're in and what does it mean and what does it look like. I'm keeping this conversation under access and academic excellence because that's going to feed right into what we do in advising. Number one, a student-ready institution understands the educational needs of the students. It is welcoming. The institution understands and provides the academic supports necessary to help students learn. Diversity is valued. The institution understands the barriers students face. It begins and ends with what the institution has to do to prepare certain students. In our advising world, we know we're that first connected relationship, but we're also, that role is changing dramatically. There's more being required of the role. There's more defining of what the role is supposed to be. And we all know, honestly, the first person students blame is their advisor. Nobody told me. Didn't nobody tell me? I thought I was supposed to do that. It's fascinating to me because my question always is to the student, let's get you as part of that relationship. This is a relationship. And the advising world has really gone from being much more episodic to continuous. So in both things, we want to talk about that relationship. In the equity space, here's where I go always. In shorthand, diversity discuss people, equity discuss our systems, inclusions discuss the institutions. So I'm gonna hit a few of those inclusion pieces at the end. Our focus on equity, we're talking about the system. The consistent, systematic, fair, just, and impartial treatment of all individuals who belong to the underserved communities that have been denied such treatment. So I think sometimes we take that hit. It's like I love Dr. Kendi in How to Be an Anti-Racist. He talks about this is not about the person, this is about the systems, the policies and procedures. So sometimes to get away from that gotcha, we have to think about the systems that we're talking about, changing and impacting, making the system more equitable for people coming into the system. In those pieces, number one, we talk about safe spaces all the time. On your campus, in your work, what does that mean? Number two, we're not looking for the gotcha. Sometimes DEI work, people always feel like, oh, you know, it's the council culture. That's not what this is about. This is about how our minds look at who we're serving, what our actions are. To truly embrace equity, we must be honestly open to expanding our thoughts. It's an issue of empathy, not sympathy, and understanding the students' background and their work. We have to know the broad impact of inequities and those missed opportunities. I was at a session recently with the St. Louis Federal Reserve, having this conversation about, is college for everybody? We've all heard this, we're struggling with this. So I'm just kind of listening to everything and just raised my hand. And I said, everybody in this room, our kids are going to college. Who are we talking about? You know, it turned into a whole different kind of conversation. Like the sneaky way we're starting to talk, that we're starting to attach workforce development tightly to education all the time. Like for a long time, we tried to dodge that bullet of education mixing as social services. This is the other bullet. When you start saying workforce focus, what are we really talking about? I mean, we all heard maybe 10 to 12 years ago in the Obama administration, this conversation about college education. We all heard 2-year, 4-year degree. We ignored those credentials, those certifications, and that's post-secondary education. We must embrace it all. We must advise into the best fit for the student first, the institution next. I discussed the tyranny of all, because so often We have a great program, a great something we're doing that's really working for our targeted population. What we're told automatically is we got to scale this. But I never hear, let's scale this and put more resources into it. Or let's scale this and make it work for everybody. And I always say, nobody breaks into an empty house. So your project, your program is successful. If we're talking about expanding it, we have to resource it as well. We have to know what that actually does mean. Because if you had $100,000 to serve 75 to 100 students, and you expand that to 200 students, but you didn't expand those resources, you've just diminished the impact. In devising caseloads, now that things are becoming much more relationship and less episodic, we have to look at what those actually do mean. Does the advisor have the time to have equitable conversation and extend that relationship? Where do we start, and what do all those words mean? Here's my quick one. Diversity is who's in the room. Equity asks who's trying to get in the room but can't. Inclusion is have everyone's ideas been heard. In the equity space, and so often I like this graphic because it does include an area that we often neglect in the conversation, which is students with disabilities. In equity conversations, we understand, but we don't always put them in that space of what's actually going on to be equitable and to be welcoming and approaching. I think that's critical. So I'm gonna run through some cool memes. I think that makes it easier because we're all normally reflective to visual learning. Number one, education is touted as a space to have these difficult conversations that may not occur in other arenas. Number two, I mentioned a few moments ago, as we combat the growing perception that a college degree may not matter, the students, families, and the staff that are most impacted by this mindset are from diverse at all levels communities. So once again, who we're talking about in this equitable space. Perception is key in embracing a diverse and equitable community. That perception can support or destroy this work. So that's very key. What you're perceiving and what you're saying it should be. Now, once again, you will always see me reference Center for Urban Education, 2016. Equality imagines a world, an equal world. I care about all students equally. But the world isn't equal. We have poorly funded schools, less skilled teachers, huge counselor to student ratios, and truncated curriculum. And it has bias, systemic racism. Now, the one I always circle on this is microaggressions. And Dr. Gooch, I will send you our presentation on microaggressions because I think that's part of this conversation. I don't want to derail it, but I want them to have the information that goes with it. So I'll send you that PowerPoint as well. Implicit bias, disproportionate remediation. That's the one that kind of always makes me think. A few years ago, one of our US senators was on our campus talking about some of this. And she made me laugh out loud when she said, well, you know what? Why don't we, if a student comes to your campuses and they have to take remedial courses, let's force those school districts to pay for it. I just kind of laughed and said, you've been on school board before? Good luck with that. So we had a long conversation about whose responsibility it is. And I said, I admitted to kid, it's my responsibility. We have to have that conversation. But we can't always leave that conversation in the lap of the advisor. Within the same picture, a diversity lens focuses only on bringing more students to an equal pathway. But we have more diversity, but we don't talk about the equity inclusion that goes with that. And in equity, redirects resources to the pathways with the greatest need to fix barriers and intentionally provide support. Back to what you guys began at the beginning, your intentionality about this. Equity says we're going to understand what people need to be successful. Years ago, when I worked in disability services, we used to talk about the fact that equity is every student getting what they need to be successful. I'm going to use some of our familiar descriptors and they get down to the bottom of it. We've all seen a version of this before. Quality equity. Let's keep going. This is what we're talking about leading to. the reality, the equality, the equity, the liberation. Equity doesn't just impact the groups that we've marginalized. It impacts opportunities for everybody. It's a broader picture. In liberation, everybody gets a chance to see without having to be adapted. So while we're focusing on equity, the goal is leading to the open remove all barriers for all students. So I like to use this one from the book, The Giving Tree, that we all know. We look at inequality. We look at equality, same. We look at equity. We look at justice. So as we form the conversation, it doesn't end with equity, but equity attracts that system that leads to justice. Okay, the critical components in equity. I mentioned empathy. We talk about the student experience. I mentioned perception, the authenticity, and empowered understanding of the advisor and the student. These are the undercurrents of what we do in equity, leading into our work with advising. Empathy. I said earlier, empathy, not sympathy. Because often we know what we see engaging with our students. Their behavior, the expressions, the outside, the body language. What's going on under there? The loss, their past, the struggles, the trauma, the pain, the thoughts. So often we're not asking you to walk in the shoes of the student. We're actually empathize with their experience and what they're bringing to this conversation, what we're actually doing, which leads into the experience. And often I talk about, I don't have to have the experience to validate and recognize the experience. And I believe sometimes we think only having the experience gives you the background of it. When I was a therapist, I had concerns about serving as a substance abuse counselor because I hadn't had that experience. I thought I had to have that experience to do it. And my advisor always said, no, it's the empathy and understanding the impact of the experience that makes it possible to help that person. So we don't always have to have the experience to do it. Perception. Life is all about how we see things. And so often I think with our students in the advising relationship, they're coming in and so often it may be a new process to them, a new structure to them. And that freshman often sees this as the extension of what occurred in high school. I go see my college counselor to get my schedule. I go see the counselor to get the schedule or to talk about the classes, not the relationship, the support, the need. Those are the structural pieces that we have to teach students when they come to us about what this actually is. The authenticity. Students know when you're not really on their side. Students know when this is just a checkbox, keep it pushing. And so often when I see that happening, it's more a conversation about time constraints and caseloads than true authenticity for the students. And so advising, once again, is that opening relationship, that open door to the institution. And so we have to make sure that they know where we stand and them being successful. And I go into empowered understanding, which means there will be mistakes made. There will be stumbles. The empowered understanding is the ability to say, I'm gonna work with you, you're gonna work with me for your success. And as you model and build that, that's the relationship with every other area on the campus that they work with. That advising relationship gives them a modicum of what's going to be like in the rest of the campus community because you're targeting on what they need to know and do. So earlier, education is not the learning of facts, but the training of the mind to think. In this process, we're talking about how we look at how our lens impacts the student in receiving the service and support. So once again, it's not that putting the onus on the student, it's the responsibility of us to bring them into this relationship that they're going to have consistently. You as an advisor are the person that they see outside of the classroom, outside of often academic support, outside of financial aid. So how you help them navigate the system defines how they see the system. Academic advisors is often one of the first campus connected and most critical relationships that students form in their first year. It is critical. They may register online, they may come through the admissions process, but we are the first people they see and bond and connect with on campus. The nature of the relationship between advisors and advisees has been changing, and increased emphasis has been placed on it being an ongoing versus episodic relationship. Working with Nakada and having those conversations, that's been a big shift in the mindset of what an advisor actually does. So I always advocate for increasing the resource of training for advisors and access to information to help them change this relationship. Because for a long time, advisors were often told, this is what you do. Get them registered, move them on. Get them connected, move them on. Now we're talking more about that relationship, what that looks like. As such, if the advisor-advisor relationship is becoming and expected to be central to the student experience, equity-mindedness is central as well. And so if we're really having a conversation about that changing relationship, that open relationship, then how we look at and how we focus on equity for students is critical. Because once again, we model for that student what their campus experience is going to be like and with their continuous relationship. And so when we don't look at the idea that what is this student bringing to us, what are we reflecting to the student, we have a missed opportunity in that student seeing their experience as being something that they're involved in and active and as representing the campus community itself. So now we're going to do a little dig into the equity mindedness piece. That's the equity piece. Let's dig deeper. As defined, a way of approaching educational reform that foregrounds the policies and practices contributing to disparities in educational achievement and abstains from blaming students for those accumulated disparities. In a nutshell, let's look at our policies. Let's look at why they exist. Let's look at our barriers. And rather than saying this is the issue of a student deficit, what can we change? Now I'm going to say some words that people cringe at all the time. The advising hold. The advising hold stuns students all the time. The bad thing about it is, on many of our campuses, that hold may not be an advising hold. It may be a hold for financial aid. It may be a hold for conduct. It may be a hold for another area, but all students know is I can't register. So it must be an advising hold. I challenge institutions to look at the placement of holds and the purpose of that hold. And who has the power or the ability to change that hold? Sometimes we are strapping our advisors in a responsibility that may not necessarily be theirs. But all the student knows is, I can't register for classes. This has to be an advising hold. Or our conversation between our departments. So, have I been on probation? Have I appealed? Have I been admitted back to the institution? But we haven't talked about my financial aid. That's a separate appeal often. That's a separate conversation. But who are we going to get answers? Our advisor. So we're asking our advisor to understand all these other areas, referring all these other areas, but where's their barrier? Our students hate to shuffle. I advocate for the idea that when students hear from one of us, they hear from all of us. So that letter, that email, that communication about probation should include financial aid, should include a conduct hold. As advisors, we have to make sure that the realm that we're responsible for, we're responsible for. So the student that comes to you, not knowing that that hold is not advising, but that hold is conduct, or that hold is financial aid, we have to be able to articulate that, but also work with those departments to understand how that impacts the work that we do. We can't say that relationship is so central and not give more authority or more responsibility or more options to that advisor doing that work, breaking those barriers, moving it. We can't, once again, abstain from blaming students for the humane disparities. Equity-minded perspective, evidence-based, race conscious, institutionally focused, systemically aware, equity advancing. Nothing in here is putting the onus on the student. So an equity-minded approach means evidence-based. We know, back to the earlier slide, what those inequities are, the microaggressions, the exclusion. We know those pieces. We can't get away from the fact that so often a lot of our equity-minded perspective is going to have to be based on race consciousness. Because where disparities come with underrepresented students. The perspective is institutionally focused. What in our system? Diversity, people, equity systems, inclusion institutions. What's going on in that perspective? Systemically aware that the system of higher education was designed as a funnel to run you through and to come out on the other end as a majority person living by the rules we set. So often our systems weren't even designed for the students that we are serving. We must assess those systems. And once we assess those systems, it's not an issue of, oh, you've been wrong and I've been wrong. The system itself needs to be adapted. Our role with economic perspective is disruption. And that leads to advancing equity. In advising, once we've looked at those pieces, once we looked at our role as an institutional representative, looked at our role as taking down those barriers, look at our role as the connection to that relationship that's no longer episodic, we are going to reflect what that looks like. These are 5 steps in looking at equity mindedness in advising. Number 1, identifying and explaining the jargon of academia. We love our acronyms. We love all the things that we define by what we do. The student sitting in front of you has never heard those terms before. I believe in a cheat sheet that we share with students about the big jargon of our institution. Because that's nothing that they get through an orientation. Use structure to demystify and support success. Navigating a system versus the referrals out. Now, here's my own pet peeve. This is Trent Ball. This is not Southeast. This is not MCC. This is not Trio. This is Trent. So often, we get caught in the shuffle for our students. We think they know what they know, which they don't know what they know. But we also are the super referral source. I'll send you here, I'll send you here, I'll send you here. And so often, do we even know that those resources are what we say they are? I was advising a student the other day about a statistics course. My first thought was, oh, we'll find you a tutor. Then I thought about the fact, do I know we have tutors in the area? Am I just going to send the kid over there hoping he's going to get a tutor? We have to get into navigation versus just the clean referral. Supporting and normalizing struggle. One of my favorite students always tells a story about his struggles and his structure. And he did the process. He was a non-social student. He did 2 years at a community college. He did 2 years at a 4-year. He got his master's degree. He did all in 5 years. He was running through to get it actually done. He was ashamed to share his struggle with his advisor because he didn't want people to think he couldn't do the work. Sometimes students connect us so well, they don't want to show us their struggles. They don't want to show us what help they need. There's a pride in false academic confidence like nothing you've ever seen. And once again, our students coming in now who are coming in test optional or coming in alternative programs, they're excited about the success. They may not be excited about the struggle. We have to normalize that that's okay, that there will be a struggle. Nobody on this call just breezed through college. I will tell you that my tutor for A&P, you thought we were dating. I was buying pizza. I was catching him coming out the door. I was handwriting notes. We have to normalize that struggle. Students need to see that. So they're not like, oh my God, I don't want to tell Dr. Gooch that I can't get this. I don't want to talk to Mark about this. We have to support that struggle. Because that's often the student who is dedicated to the mission, but hasn't figured out how to navigate it. And our advisors are the key in that. Clarifying policies and procedures. We have to be more than street level bureaucrats. We have to be more than policy enforcers. We have to clarify the policy. Why does it exist? What does it mean? I took a great class called the General Art of Verbal Self-Defense years ago, and it talked about how we reframe even what we question. Sometimes we go in and say, can I, versus how do I get this done? With our students, is it a conversation about, can you succeed in this major, or how do you succeed in this major? Very simple, very basic, but sometimes we don't always think about it that way. I'll model that for our students we're advising. Reinforcing self-advocacy, back to the concept of empowered understanding. Reinforcing that piece. You don't want to take the struggle away completely, because then the student becomes dependent. But you want to reinforce that advocacy, model that for them. We've all done it before. We've all picked up the phone, do an advising session, and called a professor and say, can I get John in your class? Or we've looked online and we've seen, okay, there are 2 spots left. We know the magic of how students self-register at times. Let's talk about that with the student, what that does mean. Let's empower that student to talk to that professor about getting in that course. Sometimes I think we take on the superhero mask and cape sometimes, but our students will get a chance to learn that skill set. If you're seeing a student consistently, the relationship, we're skill building. We're not just answering questions. As noted earlier, relationship between advisors and advisees has changed, continues to change. In the equity-minded framework, the challenge may be providing what's needed versus providing one size fits all. When my staff would see students, I would sometimes check out the calendar, and you look at the calendar and you see, oh my God, you have like 10 appointments today. Got to get all these done. Now, you're not getting that done successfully. Let's talk about that. Because there are inherent challenges in this. Time constraints, caseload, student expectations. I always say we can do 5 things marginally well or 3 things very well. Are we rushing our students into sessions to get them registered and not really advising them? And that's a conversation I'm going to have a quick slide later about advising administrators and the caseloads. But in clarifying the student need, the expectation can change as well. So in those sessions where we're registering and advising, because we can't remove the registration piece out of this, it's key to what we do. But the advising piece is really about what really needs to go on next. How impactful is that for the student? How consistent is it for the student? And what is our process in the equity-minded framework? What is what's needed versus one size fits all? Here are 2 approaches. And once again, at the bottom, you see the GrassNap resource I'm going to send you guys. Watch list or intervention. Shared action, advancing their relationship. Is this student on my watch list? Keeping a student on your radar and following up later? Or is this action intervention? Supporting the students toward a particular goal that will require scheduled sessions and meetings. There's nothing wrong with having both. I advocate bringing the student into the process of knowing where they are in your process. Is James my waitlist student? Register for this class. Holler at me in 2 weeks about your tutor. Follow up later. Or does Mark require an intervention? It's time to have a conversation about success within this major. It's time to have a conversation about, you've taken MA 101 3 times. What is this going to look like the 4th time? Back to a policy. We all know in the back of our minds that DDF rule with federal aid. Does the student understand that? that you can take a class twice and get a D and still get A. Third time that F, no A for that class. That's not a watch list. That's an intervention. And having a student know what their role is in that is very important. So I'm not saying a watch list as a checklist. I'm saying you and the student know what this relationship actually is. I'm gonna see James in 2 weeks, find if he really seeing that tutor or not. I'm gonna see Mark next week. Has he talked to his professor about this major and is this transferable? So really it's a way to look at how you structure your time as you make your appointments and work with students, but it's also the equity-minded piece of what that student does really need. Now I'm gonna jump into NACADA. Link at the bottom. In 2018, NACADA, the Global Community for Academic Advising, you guys, your professional organization, updated the organization's strategic plan, goals, and benchmarks to include goal number 4. Foster inclusive practices within the association that respect the principle of equity and the diversity of advising professionals across a vast array of intersectional identity. What I love about this is we're not just talking about diversity and equity for the student, we're also talking about for the advisor. We're talking about who's doing the advising, why the advising is occurring. Okay, once again, let's get over here. Trent Ball opinion. I'm always fascinated about the targeted advising for athletes and the community, students within the community. I get in trouble all the time for challenging some of that the student isn't in the broader community being advised. Or if a student gets cut, what happens? Is there a process for getting that student into the larger advising system? There's an equity issue going on there for me. I see it all the time. On the other end, are we providing training and development and resources for our advisors to look at their equity approach to students? So that's why I like some of this. And you'll find that NACADA has some great resources, free resources online, and 3 of the articles I'm going to send you come right from NACADA. So, and you guys will have this PowerPoint to hit the link if you want to check that piece out. But I'm going to dig into some pieces of it. The way you think about the way you think impacts the way you think. So often, people feel targeted in those DEI conversations. I want you to think about the way you think, how that impacts what you think. We all want students to be successful, but we all also carry some biases who we think is going to be successful and what it looks like. I mentioned that kid earlier that took MA 101 3 times. What was going on in their life at that time period? There's one thing that I never let go of, no matter what my role is at the university. I stay on the Financial Aid Appeals Committee, because that keeps me grounded, number one, but I get a chance to hear about what's going on in the students' lives. And as I said at the very beginning, I added the part to our process of talking to the advisor and getting something from the advisor. Because what happens is, you know what happens? I should have put the slide up. The advisor gets thrown under the bus in the appeal. So in our process, we get a letter from the advisor too. And the letter sometimes supports the students, but the letter clarifies what's going on in their advising relationship. And that's had a lot of impact. That's also empowered the advisors to feel like that's one bus they can dodge. But I always suggest that in your financial aid process, in your academic advising process, in your appeals process for probation, get information from that advisor. I guarantee you, 9 times out of 10, they do have it. So it goes back to looking at, as you process that appeal, you know, are we looking at that equitably and we have all the information that we need so we know that the system is not being accused of failing when it didn't. So I always like to throw that part out there. As a person of color, I'm Black, identify as, nope, blackity black. In the equity world, people are so afraid of the cancel culture and saying the wrong thing. How about asking the student, or on the other end, sharing with the student what you want to be called. So here's a piece of that from Nakata. The do's and the don'ts. And they put it like this, it kind of confuses me sometimes, then I got it. We talk about allyships with our students all the time. We're your ally, we're your advocate, we support you. There's some do's or don'ts. Do listening, don't expect. Do accept criticism thoughtfully, don't broadcast. There are three in here that are so critical to me. Number one, don't apologize for the actions of your identity group. So often that's that ouch. Oh, I want to apologize for all women or all whites or all blacks. That's not what this is. That's what an ally is. On the other end, don't expect credit for being an ally. Don't expect another person to educate you about their identity. You know what's simple? Listen and ask. So the whole article will come to you guys, but this is the meat of it in that work, because I always get nervous when people get so afraid to be authentic because they don't want to make a misstep. Like I said earlier, equity is not the gotcha. And in advising, we are allies with our students. And Mark knows this speech. I believe that there's ally, there's advocate, and there's agitator sometimes too. So if I was there to show you guys, I would put a chair in front of me. And I would say that as an ally, I'm standing next to the student. I would stand next to the chair. As an advocate, I stand in front of the student. The chair is behind me. As an agitator, I'm behind the chair, pushing the student forward. So sometimes your role is going to be different in what you do. That doesn't invalidate the role. It actually lets the students know that you're in this relationship with it. So sometimes as agitator, I'm saying, I want you to talk to the professor about getting in the class. Come back and talk to me about it. Now, I'm going to call over there before they get there. But I want them to have a certain role in that. So it lessens them feeling like they're just being told something, actually learning something. Allyship is important. Addressing the issue of what advising administrators can do to improve and support diversity, equity, inclusion, and belonging in the profession. Number one, hiring diverse advisors. And diversity across the intersectionality of it. Number two, professional development and continuous training. This is a continuously evolving, changing thing. Like I said, I can go back to 2018 in Nakata and go to 2021 and see the evolution of what they expect for advisors, but without the training, it's not going to work. And understand there's a distinct difference between professional development and training. Professional development is support, understanding, information, engaging on being a better professional no matter what you are doing, no matter where you are. Training is work to get the job done that you're hired to do. But we have to have both. Part of what I'm talking about today is more of the professional development piece, actually, about that larger piece of being an equity professional. There's training in the nuts and bolts of being an advisor. That's not what this is about. You guys know that work. The administrators have to create and maintain inclusive environments. Now, this is going to be uncomfortable, but it doesn't have to stay uncomfortable. I would say that in some of this work, we're nervous, we're caught up in it. It's going to be uncomfortable. The idea that the relationship that you began as an advisor changes can sometimes be uncomfortable. That's okay. The goal is we're not going to leave you uncomfortable. We're not going to ding dong you as you're learning this work, because it works tough. Since I've mentioned the two pieces, I'm going to hit on the two pieces. Diversity is a fact, equity is a choice, inclusion is an action, and belonging is an outcome. And a lot of times we know our students, and we have a unique situation in our institution because we have a main four-year campus, but we have 3 extensions that are 2-year campuses. And so often we talk about, oh, the 2-year student, they're not connected to the campus really. They're just in and out. That's not always true. Sometimes that happens because we haven't created a space of belonging for the student. Sometimes our targeted programs do that very, very well. What about the students who are not eligible for those programs? And what about not overburdening those programs with that super wait list? The belonging idea is the idea that the students, what they bring to the campus, changes and influences the campus. But I'll tell you something that's very important. The culture of a university or a college or a community college is not controlled by the students. It's controlled by the faculty and the staff. The students come and go. We are the ones creating the equitable environment. It's very key. Everyone's felt excluded at some point. Be aware and committed to creating environments that are intentionally open, welcoming, and safe. You know, we're all part somewhere in our life of a smaller community. We have to remember what that actually means. It goes back to the empathy, not the sympathy of the work. Appreciate and celebrate the fact that we're all diverse and there can be more than one way to do it, see it, and be it. You know, sometimes we get so heavily trained in this process of what we're going to do to advise the student that we'll look at the other pieces of it. One thing that I thought was kind of fascinating was going with what the student does. So for example, in learning, people will clue you in to how they learn when you listen. Now here's a shocker that probably Mark and Dr. Gooch probably don't know. In a previous life, I was a dancer. Yeah, don't laugh. I was actually pretty good. But one thing I learned was, hey, in learning, I was the kind of dancer where I would say, oh, I hear what you're saying, which means I was following the music. I wasn't following what you were showing me. Some people will say, I see what you're saying. They're following what you show them. So I learned, I'm an audio learner. So you can talk to me about something, processing with them, and I'm cool. My colleague may be a seeing learner. You may need to write that down for them or have them write that down. But finding out the way that they learn and record is very key. And later on, I'm gonna send you guys a video so you know I'm not kidding. Not for everybody to see though. We're all works in progress. Validate mine, I validate yours. Looking at the process that the student needs to be successful is what's key. Sometimes they see what you're saying. Sometimes they hear what you're saying. That seems so basic, but we all do it. Think about when you're in a grocery store and you're about to pay for something. Are you listening to what the cashier is telling you, or are you looking at the screen saying what you owe as you pull out your card and get your money together? Next time, just think about that. How do you really automatically learn? Not learning styles, not the big D part of it, but that automatic learning. And how does it go for the student? It's kind of like being an old head. It took me a while to get texting down pat, and I'm still the person that tries to write complete sentences. But I know that that's a part of how people communicate. So I had to figure out how it worked for me. When I start learning how to talk to text, because I hear, it worked very much better than just trying to text it out. So we're all works in progress. How does a student learn? Equity speaking, are you looking at how they learn and how they want to even be advised? Comfort is the enemy of growth. Learn to be comfortable in uncomfortable situations. Sometimes this student's going to come in and pour some of their chaos to you. They're going to bring all that with them to that session. You may be the only person they really can talk to. Sometimes we have to know when it's time that it's beyond our scope. Or what's the purpose of that self-disclosure? So it's going to be uncomfortable. You as the professional gets a chance to figure out how to get out of that uncomfortable situation, but it's not going to be easy. We have to know our boundaries and our goals. Everyone has a story worth hearing. Learn more about the person as you assess the situation. You know, MA 101 failed it 3 times. I didn't find out what was going on with the kid. I didn't know that his mom died, or that he had to pick up a second job to pay for some things, or that he disappeared because he was going through some other things in his personal life. Sometimes taking a few moments to kind of assess that piece is going to really change how you approach that person. Understand that there is no such thing as a view from nowhere. Commit to being aware of the presence and influence of your personal lens. And I'm going to send you guys the reference. And this, I probably shouldn't do it this way, but so often I believe some of those great books out there are much better workbooks than they are full books. Sometimes the workbook kind of just gets extra money out of you. In Dr. Kennedy's How to Be Anti-Racist, there's a phenomenal journal that he did afterwards that summarizes some of the book, but gives you a chance to kind of look at that personal lens. And we have to be careful. Now, I love the fact that he always influenced that. It says that I am not calling you a racist. I'm saying the policies and procedures that we are using are racist and perpetrate racism. You know, we talk about the person versus the action, and the actions are what's systemic. And what is the greater good? There's also the side of knowing when you're not the best person to advise this student. There's some concerns in this relationship. There's nothing wrong with saying, you know what? I think you and Mark would be a great team. I'm gonna walk you down there. We're gonna talk about him taking over you. You're working with you more. And that doesn't mean that you don't want to help the student. If there's some resistance and you are that student, why keep this going? And no, you know, that's what Clint Eastwood said, man's got to know his limitations. And there's nothing wrong with that. Here's the big circle. So I like Venn diagrams, but you guys get this part. It's all the pieces. It's belonging. It's looking at what that actually means and what those crosses actually look like, because we're shooting for that piece in the middle. In equity, we're constantly recognizing and redistributing the power in that relationship. That is not an issue of failure when this is a student that you can actually reach. In fact, that's the issue of strength, of knowing that they need something you may not be able to give them. That's not an issue of a loss on your part. That's the strength of knowing that this relationship is what it needs to be. You knew it was coming. In this work, as equity champions, there are 4 pieces of it. There's the passion for student success. There's the purpose. There's your training and development, and then there's the push. And sometimes all 4 are not occurring at the same time, and that's okay. What's key is the fact that you know which one you're dealing with. There's a great conversation, I think I had it with Mark and Eli, about burnout and brownout. You know, there are times where, I don't know about you guys, but by week like 12, I'm done. You know, I'm done. My empathy well is full. And that's why we talk about having those times to step back and recharge. You know, there's nothing wrong with saying today the dragon won. That's part of the push. But preparation is key. We've got to keep ourselves as educators educated on some of this work. It's just consistent, I believe. And it often feels like this. I made a comment once, and when a staffer thought it was so funny, but I was really serious. I was sharing with somebody that I thought they were wildly inefficient. You know, you're constantly moving and spinning. I see you moving all the time. I don't see some stuff getting done. And sometimes, like I said earlier, we take too many things on. You can do, once again, 5 things marginally well, or 3 things very well. I think I'm a good advisor, but I can't see 20 kids in one day and say I gave a good advisor. I got them in and out, but it felt like this. Keep calm and carry on. Sometimes we take on our students' chaos, it becomes ours. There's a book I didn't quote in here, I'm gonna have to add in my email, called The Woman, the Manager, and the Monkey. Sometimes folks come into your office, they bring you a monkey to drop on your desk and run. We have to keep a monkey under our desk to hand them, so now they got 2 monkeys. I think sometimes we get so caught up in the fact that we have to solve the problem for the student. And that's an equity issue too, because they may not learn the solution. Sometimes we are problem focused when our goal is to be solution creators. That's a totally different approach. So once again, in assessing your student needs, do they need this problem solved? Do they need a solution created? Because we always say we're gonna do whatever it takes to help a student. Number one, advising provides pathway to change. We are the first person to hear about a student displeasure in a class, challenges with a class. I don't like this professor. Professor don't like me. We provide that pathway to change. Number two, we are a stabilizing force and a support for a student in their academic career. There's also that conversation between advisors and faculty advisors and what that looks like it means. We all know that even if we transfer a student to a faculty advisor, we're still paying attention to what's going on. We help the student explore options and create opportunities. It is not a failure on anybody's part to change your major. It is a failure not to acknowledge the path that they're on. That's not going to lead to success. We're often the sounding board for the student. We provide that real talk. Back to MA 101. But most importantly, we are a critical resource. We're often mentors and sponsors for students. In the equity-minded space, what role are you in? And have you actually fully shared with that student that's the role you see yourself in? A mentor is having a conversation. A sponsor is giving that strong advice to what's necessarily go to the next level. A mentor is, I'm gonna help you find a class that you need right now to work on this. A sponsor is, okay, you're graduating next semester, what's the plan? It's the passing the onus. As professionals, we need mentors and sponsors. So we frame it the same way that we need equitably, we want those pieces, cannot be done in one situation. As we pursue diversity, equity, inclusion, we must plan, be strategic, be organized, and responsive. When I say plan, I don't just mean that check sheet that we have, what class you in, I got you in this class. It's the long range with them. It's being strategic, which means that authenticity, that honesty, that framework of watch list versus intervention. We must organize. And when I say organized, I mean our relationship as professionals working together and what's best for advising on our campus and in our world. And responsive. This isn't the 3 o'clock email, the 3 a.m. email. That's not what I'm saying responsive. Responsive means the honesty with the student about where you see their success actually being. Responsive to their needs. As I showed earlier, we often feel like this. But sometimes we have to remember that a lot of times we're providing this. The academic advisor is usually the first relationship that's campus connected for our students. We have a responsibility and an honor to make sure that we approach them equitably for their needs. Here's some of the resources I mentioned earlier. And this is me being honest, I've gotten older and lazier. So that APA list wears me out. So now I do this. Here the book is. Here are the books that talk about the demographics I mentioned at the very beginning of the conversation, about the equity piece. Dr. Garver here talked, that's where I got the information, demographics about the 2010, 2015, 2020. The Agile College talks about equity as we look at the changing demographics of who we serve. Becoming a Student-Ready College. The second book, so actually listed in order of setup. We talked about Becoming Student-Ready College. I didn't dig in from Equity Talk. I will send that to you, the information with that book, the key areas that we talked about with Dr. McNair, so you guys actually have that as a reference point. But I didn't want to, try to keep it to 50. I went over though. Here are two pieces that are very important. We all have unconscious bias. That does not mean we're doing bias acts. Number two, keeping us engaged. This is a great book to listen to what students are saying. And there's a section there where they're talking about their advising experience. Because I always say students are our experts. Let's find out what they're saying. I always encourage any department on campus to do an annual, not survey, but actual focus group. And not always your usual suspects, the one that love you all the time. Fast students are going to tell you what I said earlier, by being able to accept criticism thoughtfully. Additionally, things I didn't mention, but that are important, are how to be an inclusive leader. And this discusses actually, no matter where you are in the leadership structure, what inclusivity means. The importance of belonging. So the information I brought about belonging, I mentioned in earlier slides, it's in here. These two are very important. For some of us, what racism costs everyone, how we can prosper together, it doesn't just stick you in the fact that we're in this racist system, inequitable system. It talks about how we move together forward. And how to achieve educational equity is actually by a friend of mine. I get no kickback for this. By a friend of mine, he really talks about that pipeline piece, because he's a K-12 educator, he was the principal, and now he's over human resources at a large, large school district in St. Louis, and he's struggling with that part earlier about the diversity in the pipeline, but he talks about that, leading right into the advising work, because we know that challenging advising in high school leads to a challenging advisee in college. And so my last point is always going to be superheroes. But I use this on the equity piece because how many people really noticed the diversity of this group? They've been around since the 1940s. But you have an Israeli woman, an African-American man, Pacific Islander, and a young man who's Jewish. So this is already here. This idea that the demographics have changed is already here. We've got to look at an equity focus in doing that work. And the equity focus means, what is your lens? What is their perspective? And what is the work? And if my timing is right, good, made it. All right, now I know this was quick and dirty, so I'm going to make sure to send you guys the resources that support it, as well as the two other PowerPoints I mentioned, the microaggressions and educational equity, but I'm ready for questions.
All right, let's give it up for Dr. Ball.
Not yet.
Not yet, close. To
Heading
be.
down the path.
So this was amazing, amazing, amazing.
Thank you.
I have lots of notes, and I'm not an advisor, but I really love that you said it is a responsibility and an honor. Woo! That hit right here. And it was really important for us to start talking about equity mindedness in advising. So send me questions in the chat. I have a few already. Let me scroll up. Send me questions to ask in the chat. Here is one. Normalizing struggle is so important. And what a great point. What are some examples you would recommend advisors to use to encourage students to share their stories?
There are two things I think are always critical. And I mentioned earlier, sometimes it's, as old therapists, we have that thought in the back of our mind. Self-disclosure is purposeful. And so often the students look at us as these easily slid through modicum, like I said earlier. I remember A&P from 33 years ago. So I've said to students before, I've struggled in this too. I had tutors. I can't think of a year in undergrad I didn't have tutor for something. And sometimes showing them that you've had a struggle before opens the door for them to have the conversation. Number two, sometimes you can actually use their advising session, the ones that they missed, the change classes, the drop classes, as an open door to discussing what's going on. I found one of the best lines I've ever learned to get a student to open up is, help me understand how we got here. So I'm acknowledging that there's a struggle going on, but I want you to help me understand where it is from your perspective. So one is the self-disclosure and opening up to your struggle, and two is giving them a chance to provide their perspective on what's going on with them. And it's safer when you own the fact that you want to understand too. You remove that feeling of judginess, and it goes to more of that, like I mentioned earlier, assessing the situation.
Awesome. Thank you. Thank you. Any other questions?
I'm making the notes for what I need to send.
Oh, I'll remind you if you.
Well, there's another piece that if I had a second, I can jump with,
Go
because I
go
think
for it.
that I didn't hit this like I wanted to, making sure I got good time.
Okay, go ahead.
The authenticity piece is so important, and that does not mean that you have to pour your heart out and they know your whole life story.
Right.
It's the honesty of saying, teach me how to help you. What do you need for me to help you in this? Sometimes, like I said earlier, students are connected to us to the point where they don't want to share their truth with us. They don't want to disappoint us, or they're embarrassed, or they don't know. I believe that when they come to our mission at the very beginning, it's that jargon piece. You know, we throw it out quickly. I don't know what that is. And we've all sat there before in a situation where we didn't want to ask, we didn't want to seem like we didn't know, and we left not knowing. Sometimes sharing that piece, we use, even in our TRIO program, it took us a while to figure this out. We put together this one-sheeter, and we call it a fact sheet, but really it's 10 things. On the front are 10 questions that we say yes to. On the back, 10 questions that we say no to. Like the big one on the no is there a first generation scholarship on campus? No, there is grant aid. In advising, it can be these things, these 5 things on the front that are very key. On the back, the 5 things that they're not responsible for. The big one for me is always that hole. The hole is always the big one. Everybody calls it an advising hole. It's not an advising hole. You can't register because these other things will be going on. So that's when I was put in the back. How do I think we write it like, how do I remove a hole? Then I talk about the kind of holes they are and who you contact to remove the hole. So sometimes it's really, the authenticity is letting them know what you don't know too.
Right. But that you'll find out.
Exactly. I had a great professor in grad school that would start the class by saying, what questions do we have? If you didn't have it, he didn't have your answer, he had it next week. I always thought that was so cool. And sometimes I think about advising, like I think a doctor's appointment. I had a great doctor who I waited 20 minutes for, 30 minutes for every time, but I got my 20 minutes too. So he kind of retrained us into that waiting room situation. It's kind of like that with advising. Sometimes you have to be able to say to the student, I need to spend more time with this student. Can we reschedule? Or not that they feel any less, because they'll get their time too. So it's really being honest about that piece. Or like, I know that I'm a better advisor in the morning than I'm at 4 o'clock. And so I want to make sure I'm honest about how I schedule my appointments and my time. I used to always say that a 30-minute advising appointment is really 45 minutes. So I would schedule it that way. I would tell the students it's going to be a 30-minute appointment, but I always have 15 minutes after.
Right.
In case it goes over, or to prepare for the next student. Like I always like to hear my doctor outside the door, picking up my file and reading it first before he came in. The students want the same kind of experience. They want to know that when you come in, you're ready for them. I thought there was a second question. I was jumping, once I get going, I get going.
No, that's fine. Any other questions? Put them in the chat, please. Lots of comments.
I don't know if that's a good thing.
Oh yeah, absolutely it is. It's great to hear the advisor perspective as a faculty member. We have deans, we have advisors on here.
Excellent.
Well, of course, TRIO is in the house. Lots of student affairs. Learning to be uncomfortable in the uncomfortable situations. I love this. This is how growth and change happens. Thank you, Ivana. Ivana was lighting my chat up.
Well, what's funny? Dr. Kendi's book really helped me. The journal did, because I had to really, and the one that sticks in my mind really is, we're all customers at times. And we all know what it's like when you're frustrated, but they don't know why you're frustrated, what's actually going on. My perfect example always is we have all run out to pick up something real quick and got what we thought was the worst line in the world. Sometimes advising kind of feels the same way. The student wants to run in and rush these classes and roll out. You know they need more time than that.
Right.
So sometimes we have to begin by saying what this process is going to be. It's that calmness of it. I'm glad your faculty members, because so often I work with faculty advisors and often tell the faculty advisors, let's talk about the fact that the student assumes that you can answer every kind of question. And so often when you get to a faculty advisor, it's for the department. But as a faculty advisor, I'm not fully abreast of every other department, everything that actually goes on. And there's nothing wrong with that. That's where it goes to that navigation piece and that referral piece. I've often said that departments between academic advisors and faculty advisors is a key relationship on the handoff because it never really does end.
Right. I have another question that came in from
Excellent.
Mr. James Hawthorne, Director of Veterans Upward Bound. Mr. Ball, I appreciate the information that you provided around colleges being student ready. How can we help our other staff or faculty persons who do not attend sessions like this to implore a more student-ready focus?
Good question. Once again, I don't get kickback on the book, but Dr. McNair talks about, and so does Michelle Cooper, talks about the idea that so often the student-ready focus comes from releasing the silo. And so often we know our department, we know our stuff. And so it goes back to the training piece. Like even in this conversation, you have such a mixed group here, it's gonna lead to a different conversation after this. So step one is sharing the resource that you just got, sharing with them what you've actually experienced and what you've seen in it, and then taking some of those points and giving examples for them. So one I can do quickly, I did recently actually, was, let me get it right, when they were listing the things that were, here we go. In this conversation, all of these sound like there's a student issue here, but they don't ask what policy came out of this perception. I hear, are we lowering our academic standards all the time? And my first question always is, what are they established to reflect? What are the standards established to reflect? So we have to make sure that we don't put the modifier on the student. The modifier is on the system. Because once again, we are the ones that control the culture of our institution. Students come and go. I like the fact that you want to talk to your colleagues on these pieces. We got to dig right in and say, who are we modifying? That's why, you know, people bristle when I start saying systematically excluded, because I've got to pull that adjective off of that student's back. And there's nothing wrong because we're the ones that control and define the system. Ergo, we are the ones that can change it. So the second question is asking them, what can you change? What barrier can you remove? It's simple as what's going on right now. I don't know what you guys are doing on your campus, but we're having that back balance conversation with some of the CARES Act funding.
Yes.
And the first thing I said was, if we clear the back balances of these 984 students, how many are going to re-register for the next semester?
Mm-hmm.
And if we do, are you prepared for that?
Mm-hmm.
So I want to take some of this money right here that we're about to give out and give you some one-term people over here to see if we can assist them as well. Because a lot of times we make a change that benefits the system temporarily. So it sounds like I'm very much for it, but I want to make sure that once we do this, it's going to, think about for a second, you're re-enrolling 984 people. That's a nightmare in the spring. Because you know, the window for re-enrolling for the spring is very narrow because you have to look at the summer and the fall. So sometimes we aren't student ready because we're making a policy decision that's right here and right now. when I talk about academic advisor administrators, I think administrating academic advising has to always embed in it the continuous development.
Mhm.
And the one cool thing the pandemic taught us was we can all do webinars.
Yes.
Now, you know what's funny? I'm the webinar person that had to get my back broken about not listening and just taking the PowerPoint. And that's why I make sure to put everything that's important in the PowerPoint, because I know sometimes we do that. We multitask. I'm okay with that. That's why you'll see full statements so you don't miss a piece of what I'm saying.
Right.
You have what's important. And James, you can always contact me. When I'll send this to you guys again. I'll put a few more things in it. But I'll
Okay.
send it to you guys again. And I'll have my email address in there as well.
Okay. So everyone, you all attendees will get all of the references from Mr. Ball. He'll send to me. I'll send it out, not today, but probably Monday.
I like that honesty.
And the last question is from Elizabeth Vasquez, another TRIO staff person. Firstly, I want to say thank you. It is so refreshing to meet others in academia who believe in the work that you are talking about today. My question is, how do you respond to colleagues who don't agree with how you operate because they feel like we are hand-holding or working outside of your position, or accuse the student of being needy?
Number one, right now, students are needy. There's so much going on right now. There's nothing wrong with it. It's like normalizing the struggle, normalizing their neediness. That's true. But we have to get away from that customer service model. Because customer service model says that, number one, we all know the customer isn't always right. But number two, that means that it's still an episodic relationship. Right now, it's an ongoing relationship with students. When people tell me that, oh, you're hand-holding the students, we can always talk about the fact that as we teach them self-advocate, they do move on. The challenge is a lot of people say that because they're afraid that they might have to do it too. Everybody doesn't do everything. I think I'm a great advisor in certain areas. In certain areas, I'm not. Like I said before, I tell my students there are 8 of us. Any of us you can be any of our caseloads.
Mm-hmm.
If it's not working, either one can make that change. So sometimes, Elizabeth, it's offering the staff an opportunity to say what they can learn from what you're doing. And one key part that you said that stuck with me, hit differently, was working outside of your area. We all work for the institution. And where we can be successful is important. Right now, we're all doing multiple jobs. That's okay. Now, what you could low-key be saying is they think that you're getting their business. And that's a different kind of conversation. But so often it goes to that referral piece. We all have departments that ouch us a little bit. And what I often do is I meet with them. Tell me where you think the boundaries should be. Or sometimes I do it for my staff. Sometimes you got that super staff. They're kicking down doors all the time. They live in the agitator role all the time. So sometimes you have to go in and kind of smooth that over. I think that a key is, and Mark said this before, we all need to have advisory groups in our campus to our area that includes our usual suspects and our challenges. Because your usual suspects will bring over your challenges. And so I'm accused all the time of being other folks' business, Because, my policy is when you work in TRIO, you have your own student affairs in your office. But bringing them in is important. So I think having that conversation, because I'm sure right now somebody telling on me somewhere. I'm just being real. But thank you for that question.
Thank you. I'll leave with this. The students are everyone's business, right? So I think that's what we're here for. Thank you again, Mr. Ball. Everyone, please provide a reaction. If you could come off mute, no questions, but clap, say yay, cheer, whatever, because we're moving on. And I want to alert you to our next presenter, who will send that out Monday. Dr. Chris Salinas is an associate professor in the Educational Leadership and Research Methodology Department at Florida Atlantic University. His research promotes access and equality in higher education and explores the social and political context of educational opportunities for historically marginalized communities. He's the founder and educator-in-chief for the journal committed to social change on race and ethnicity.
Hey,
So
I know who that is. That's I know who that guy is.
you know, Chris.
Yeah, I'm gonna have to sneak in on the LinkedIn. Hold on.
I'll send you the link. I'll send you the link. Chris actually is from Kearney, Nebraska. So he's a Mexican American immigrant, comes from an immigrant family doing big things, big things.
He did a presentation at the area concert, the
Yes,
Association for Research. That's where I saw him.
And Encore. And he's one of my former students, advisors. So he's big money Chris. But we are bringing big money Chris. I mean, Dr. Celine. So pardon me, it's Friday. Okay. So you know, we just try to keep it real. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you guys for attending.
Student Affairs, Dr. Vasquez, thank you for promoting this to your staff. Trent, we will have you back.
And I'll get this stuff to you. I'm like you. I do it over the weekend. I'm not gonna lie and say today.
Right.
But I'll throw some more books on there. I'll put the links in and have the articles together. In fact, it's gonna be a lot of stuff, so I'll probably need to send in a couple of emails. Or do you have a Dropbox?
I do.
Okay. If we can't get that, emails are not a problem.
Okay. And the other thing, and you know, Trent talked about this. Continue the conversation.
Yes. Continue
the conversation. When you receive the resources, have those conversations in your meetings, you know. Man, Mark, do you have that booklet? Let me share something real quick that I had you all print off. I can't find it at my desk. Oh, here it is. So we are, the Chronicle. Yeah. This. So everyone, the Chronicle published this summer, Retaining Underserved Students, Strategies for Success in a Post-Pandemic Era. And it is a total of 62 pages, right? And very easy read. So for us in TRIO programs, we're gonna dissect this and we're gonna have special meetings to talk about this. How can we up our game? How can we better serve our students? So
I'm going to send you the diversity one too. I got that. I'll send it to you. I made a note of it.
Okay. So if you want a link to this, anyone, I got you. Okay.
Austin, something else, you guys. We don't expect you to read all these books.
Trent.
That's easy.
Trent,
that's an easy read.
This is right. It's 63 pages, 64 pages.
But you want to have the resources so when you need to pull it together, you're ready to roll.
Exactly. But this one, everybody can do this.
Yeah, I like that.
Super easy. Okay.
I had my 2 GAs read it and pull it apart and present up.
I wish I had a GA. You're a community college, so
there's a way to do. Let's talk about that. There's a way we do it.
Okay. People are putting in the chat they want this, but send me an email.
Please. I got you.
Okay. All right. Thank you, everybody. Happy Friday.
Have a good weekend.
You too. Thanks.